Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, November the 18th, 2025. Today I want to talk about Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. I haven't talked about him for some time. It's always a controversial subject and not everyone likes what I say, but there are things going on in Ukraine. There's always something going on in Ukraine. We've got a corruption scandal that is grabbing a lot of people's attention. And, perhaps the West are beginning to realize what they're dealing with in terms of the Ukrainian government, as well as the Ukrainian president. And so in this video, I will be looking at the horoscope of Volodymyr Zelensky and just, seeing what's going on at the moment. But before I look at Volodymyr Zelensky and Ukraine, I want to consider the astrology and I Ching for today, which is Tuesday, November the 18th, 2025. So here is a chart of today, set for noon, New York time. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So right now, Tuesday, we have got the moon in Scorpio. So the moon is at 9 Scorpio at noon, moving towards a conjunction of Venus, and the moon is still in the Via Combusta, that last part of the Via Combusta, in Scorpio, and the usual warnings about this. We can't necessarily assume that everything is just going to work to plan, and so we need to make sure we've got a backup, and that we are as flexible as possible. I think part of the problem can be that if we are completely fixated on one way of doing things, well, that's when problems can arise. And the moon is making a conjunction to Pluto sort of late in the day and into tomorrow. Sorry, did I say a conjunction to Pluto? I mean a conjunction to Venus. The moon is actually making a square to Pluto at the beginning of the day, and then it's making the conjunction to Venus. So moon conjunct Venus is an aspect that it tends to be quite fortunate, although it is in Scorpio. I mean, it can be quite an intense conjunction, with the moon being fallen in Scorpio, Venus being in detriment in Scorpio. So relationships are certainly there. The emotional side of things should not be neglected, but by any means. And aside from that, well, talking about Scorpio, Mercury is now at 0 degrees 34 Sagittarius. It's going retrograde. So Mercury is certainly getting ready to move into Scorpio, and it moves into Scorpio tomorrow, Wednesday at 3:20 a.m. London time. So that means that if you're in the Americas, then late this evening, Mercury is likely to go into Scorpio. Maybe not if you're in, I don't know, eastern Brazil, but I think that certainly in the United States, Mercury goes into Scorpio late this evening, and so that will create a change. But I don't really want to talk about Mercury moving to Scorpio in this video. I'll save that for tomorrow. Now, we do have 2 sesquiquadrates today, and one of those sesquiquadrates is Mars hitting Jupiter. So where's Mars gone? Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter. And Mars is not just making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter, it's also on the fixed star Antares. I mean, I talked about Antares yesterday. I think for one of the videos, I think when I was talking to Sagittarius, I mentioned the fact that Mars was on Antares. And, Antares can be quite a difficult fixed star. I'll just read again what I said, what I was reading to Sagittarius last time with Mars on Antares. So Antares, Antares is, an important star. It's certainly not something trivial, and it was one of the four royal Persian stars, and it's as Vivian Robson says in his Fixed Stars and Constellations in Astrology, it's sometimes called Shiloh and core Scorpio, which would be the Scorpion's heart, and it can be a problem. It's Robertson says it causes malevolence, destructiveness, liberality, broad-mindedness, evil presages and danger of fatality, and makes its natives rash, ravenous, headstrong, and destructive to themselves by their own obstinacy. I'm not saying that we're going to be necessarily completely damaged and destroyed by Mars on Antares, but if we find ourselves being obstinate and looking for a conflict, maybe we need to think again. And Robson says about Mars conjunct Antares, he says, detrimental habits powerfully affecting the life, quarrels with friends and relatives, fairly favourable for gain. So, it's not an easy influence. I mean, it might be quite dramatic having Mars in Sagittarius, conjunct Antares, and sesquiquadrate Jupiter. And with the sesquiquadrate to Jupiter, Jupiter increases what it touches. So with that sesquiquadrate between Mars and Jupiter, things could get out of hand. Things could get over the top. We might want to take things too far. So we do have to be careful about how we use our energy. And we have another sesquiquadrate. We have Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune. So Venus at 14:45 Scorpio, right on the Aries point, or at least sesquiquadrate the Aries point. So that Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune, I mean, it might be a confusing influence, and in terms of how we treat other people, we shouldn't make assumptions about what another person is like, particularly if we don't know someone very well. We only have surface appearances to go on. Those surface appearances could be very misleading. So in terms of relationships and what you're told and what you're promised, don't necessarily assume that you're being told the truth. Just because someone is telling something that is untrue, well, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're lying. They might think they're telling the truth, but they might not be. Though Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune, does have a positive side. It can be, quite spiritual. Boundaries get worn down, and we might be aware of just something else that goes beyond us. And so it's not necessarily bad. It depends what we're doing. If we're trying to do something very detailed where accuracy is important, then Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune might not be helpful. If we're dealing with delicate relationships, again, could be a problem, because we might be deceived. On the other hand, if we're painting a picture or creating poetry or creating art, then Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune, shouldn't be such a bad thing. And Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune, it also says something about the world in which we're living in, how people behave. I think this Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune, could have an impact, for example, on Volodymyr Zelensky, because it hits his Mars-Saturn midpoint. That Mars-Saturn midpoint, I mean, it's really important for him because he's got Aries. He's got Aries making the Aries point, making a sesquiquadrate to his Mars-Saturn midpoint, and that's triggered by Venus and Neptune. But I'll be talking about that later in the video. So turning to the picture for Sydney, Australia. So in Sydney, Australia, at noon, the moon is much earlier in Scorpio. It's sort of 1 degree Scorpio. So if you are in Australasia and New Zealand, then this morning the moon could well be in Libra, and so with the moon in late Libra, not doing a great deal. The moon is essentially void of course in Libra, so it might seem, if you're in Australasia, that at the beginning of the day nothing much is going on, and then the moon moves into Scorpio, and there's a new chapter, and the moon straight away makes a square to Pluto before moving on towards that conjunction of Venus. So perhaps in Australasia the real action doesn't take place until the late morning and early afternoon, when you start to see what is happening, and that's when the day starts to establish itself, and you realize that the moon is in Scorpio rather than in Libra. And then there is the heliocentric view. That is the heliocentric view set for a week ago, so I'm going to have to change that to make it today's date rather than the date for a week ago. There we are. So as far as what's happening here, a reminder that the Earth is still quite close to a conjunction of Uranus. There's the Earth at, suppose I say still, in fact, sorry, the Earth is applying to a conjunction of Uranus, and that's always going to be reflected in the geocentric picture as well. So right now, the Sun in late Scorpio is moving towards an opposition of Uranus, but an opposition with the Sun geocentrically is a conjunction with the Earth heliocentrically, and with the Earth 3 degrees off a conjunction to Uranus, with it applying, we can feel the things moving. The pace is starting to hot up, and at the same time, some people are digging down, and that can be what we can observe with Earth conjunct Uranus. People want to do things their way. They're not happy with what other people suggest. That there is a focus on individuality, but you can't have a situation where everyone is being an individual. Someone has to give in, or at least give away something. They don't necessarily have to give away everything. And so maybe it's that Earth conjunct Uranus is the main thing going on at the moment. And look how Mercury is moving towards a conjunction of the Earth, and likewise Mercury is moving towards a conjunction of the Sun. I mean, Mercury is retrograde, so we have got building up geocentrically a Sun-Mercury conjunction opposition Uranus, because this Sun, I think the Sun-Mercury conjunction takes place right at the end of Scorpio. Once Mercury's gone retrograde back into Scorpio. So we're just seeing this information in a different way in the heliocentric chart. We're just seeing Mercury, Sun, Uranus together, and I will be tracking this movement over the next couple of days. So let me now switch to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, November the 18th, 2025. Aries, you have a lot of energy, but the question is, what do you do with this energy? And, we can see this energy in terms of Mars making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter. Also, there is Mars conjunct Antares. So Mars is on a rather important fixed star. And if you've been watching my introduction to this video, I read from Vivian Robson, and Vivian Robson was a bit negative on Mars conjunct Antares. The possibility of being in too much of a hurry. You want things to happen, and you could be in the mood for picking fights. I mean, in theory, I'm not saying that is going to be the case in practice, or you just might get involved in a conflict, or certainly be aware that you and other people have a difference of opinion. And with Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter, you want to take action, as I've just said. The question is, can you take action, and what is the right way to take the initiative? So these are important questions for you. And ideally, Aries, you're not going to get obsessed, and I think that is important. You might feel that you have to do something. You might assume a conflict. You might even look for a conflict, taking the view that if you want to do something, original, that demonstrates your individuality, inevitably it's zero sum. Someone wins, someone loses. But I don't know if that's necessarily the case. It could be that your gain, your victory, doesn't come at anyone else's expense. And ideally, you'll be trying to elevate the situation, look beyond it, look beyond the details, and ask yourself questions and be reflective. You can be reflective. The moon is moving into Scorpio, and with the moon moving into Scorpio, there is an emphasis on the emotional for everyone. It's not just about Scorpios. It is about for all the 12 signs, including Aries. And the moon is, asking you, not to just go for the first thing that go for the first thing you come across. Just do give yourself the chance to really understand what is going on, certainly before taking action. It's easy to act. I mean, why are you acting? It's almost instinctive. It's just a response. And if you do the first thing that comes to mind, what seems easy, that just might not be the right thing to do. And instead, Aries, I think if, as far as possible, you should try to exercise some constraint. I think you can. And it could well be, Aries, that there are just certain things which you may have moved on from, that are not giving you what they're used to. And yeah, you could get angry about them. You could even get passionate about them, but you can't get passionate about things forever. And some things lose their shine and lose their intensity. And so, yes, if you can move on, that would make things easier. And that particularly relates to a situation where there is a conflict. Particularly if it's a long-standing conflict. Yeah, you could get involved in a conflict. Maybe you could win, but maybe you could regard this conflict as something from the past that you don't necessarily need to be bothered about. Now, we do have a second sesquiquadrate. I have talked about Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter. It's an aspect that could encourage you to take things too far. Venus is also sesquiquadrate Neptune, and this Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune aspect might relate to other people. And being an Aries, you like to be direct and to the point. I mean, I know that today is somewhat complicated, more complicated than the average Aries would like. But you like things to be direct and to the point. But I don't think anyone is going to be. So if you're looking for answers, solutions, you want to discuss things in a sort of a logical way, then you might have to deal with people who just make things difficult for no apparent reason. And it's almost like you're expected to understand what is going on in another person's heart, in another person's mind. You're supposed to anticipate it. And that's probably unreasonable. But a lot of people do have that expectation. They expect you to be a mind reader. They expect you to be super sensitive. They even expect you to see through their own lies. They might, for example, tell you a lie, something that is untrue, and they might sort of almost expect you to know that they're lying and to be able to interpret their words with huge subtlety. And being an Aries, that's not necessarily something you want to do. But with Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune, if you're dealing with someone who is important to you for whatever reason, then you just don't assume that what they say is what they mean. And there could be a lot of illusion and delusion flying around, but you needn't be part of it. Just understand what's going on and realize that there are a lot of emotions flying around, and just because that is the case doesn't mean to say that you can reach definite conclusions on the basis of vague feelings. Taurus. Venus is in quite a powerful position in some respects, and of course that matters if you are a Taurus, because Venus is your ruler. And so the thing about Venus is that Venus is now at around 15 degrees Scorpio. And the thing about 15 degrees Scorpio, it's in the middle of a fixed sign. And Venus is making a 135-degree aspect to the Aries point. So that does put a lot of focus on you. And you do understand things. You get which way everything is going. That doesn't mean that you can always make use of this understanding, but it's there. And then Venus is making a sesquiquadrate to Neptune. So Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune, you're aware of how difficult it is to be aware, if you like. You want things to be straightforward. I mean, you are a Taurus after all, but for things to be straightforward, everyone has to be clear. People have to be open and they have to be honest, and it may be difficult to find that level of honesty. There's just, a lot of subterfuge. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that you don't necessarily understand. And maybe Taurus, it's best that you just accept that position of not understanding, kind of knowing what you don't know, especially on an emotional level. And, if you take that approach, then I suspect that you're going to be okay. And, do think about what people are doing and the images they are presenting. With the moon, the moon is now moving into Scorpio. It's moving through Scorpio. It's in your opposite sign. It's making a conjunction to Venus. So moon conjunct Venus in Scorpio is about other people and what other people are doing and how you're feeling about other people. And you could feel all sorts of things, and knowing what's going on, could be difficult, and you just might not know, and that could be frustrating. It could be frustrating because you almost feel ready for something. You kind of have a vision. You have an idea about what would make things wonderful. And it would be great if everyone could be supportive, but there might be a lack of support. People are dragging their feet. They don't have much in the way of vision, or rather they have a limited vision, and they're focusing on this limited vision, and they're not prepared to consider things from a completely different perspective. They're just not prepared to go down that road. And so this is another reason why you need to be patient, and you need to be tolerant, and you have to sort of understand why people are delaying, why everyone is delaying. It may not just be people, it might be organizations. But it's frustrating when you feel that you have sorted it out, but you're just not quite there. And it shouldn't bother you. You know, these are the times we're living in. This is Tuesday. This is what Tuesday is all about. And if you can make some effort to understand what's going on, I think that would just make things easier. And do, if possible, listen to your feelings, what your feelings are telling you, but without being completely overwhelmed by them. We still have a grand trine in water signs. The Sun in Scorpio is still trine Jupiter and Saturn, and with that grand trine in water signs, your ability to understand other people is pretty good. The emotions are flowing. Your ability to pick up on these emotions is strong, but your ability to absolutely understand what is being transmitted may be less than perfect. So that's why it's important not to make assumptions. And continuing on the theme of other people, Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter, and Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter, that's a 135-degree aspect. I regard a sesquiquadrate as being quite a strong aspect. With that aspect, it may not be about you. It may be about another person and what they're doing, what they're behaving, and perhaps someone going too far, or at least wanting to go too far, and maybe you just have to stay out of their way with Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter. Or you should not be surprised by another person's exaggeration, because they've got a lot of energy. There is a lot of energy flying around with Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter, but a lot of people don't know what to do with this energy. And, when you've got trapped energy, then, that could say something about people's behavior and what they say, and people might be unreasonable. And from your perspective, Taurus, just take it in your stride. Things might become a little difficult and unstable over the next few days. Again, it's not your problem. It may be just what other people are doing, and the reason for that is that the Sun is making an opposition to Uranus. You've got the Sun in Scorpio, in your opposite sign, making an opposition to Uranus. Remember, Uranus has gone back into Taurus, so that Sun opposition Uranus could easily stir things up. And when you're looking at the various relationships you're in, ask yourself how things could change or how things could go wrong, depending on your perspective. And try to be aware of things that are brewing. And in that way, you may be able to anticipate the issue and perhaps make sure that some kind of explosion, never happens. Gemini. Mars is in Sagittarius. It's in your opposite sign. And today there is a lot of focus on Mars, for two reasons. One reason is that Mars is sesquiquadrate Jupiter, and the other reason is that Mars is conjunct Aries, which is a somewhat turbulent fixed star. And this Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter could very well have an impact on you. It could have an impact on you and other people. There is a relationship feel to the aspect, and that's how a lot of people are experiencing it, regardless of their sign. So don't be surprised by other people's behavior. There are certain things that certain people find to be of great significance, that they're prepared to fight for, they're prepared to take a stand for, and that means you maybe have to tread carefully, because suddenly you find that that someone is deadly serious, and they're not prepared to compromise, and further, in certain situations they might be looking for a fight, looking for an argument. I mean, it is absolutely possible. And so, Gemini, do be careful what you say. because your words might be misinterpreted. There's nothing wrong with what you say, by the way, but it's just that certain people might be sensitive, too sensitive, and you're not really sure entirely what is going on because you yourself are in a process of change. You have been in a process of change for some time, and you've had Mercury going retrograde, and Mercury going retrograde, well, it's always a bit of a problem, isn't it, with Mercury going retrograde? You might have to go back on things. You seem to be ready to do something, and you just couldn't get it together. And now Mercury is on the verge of moving back into Scorpio. In fact, Mercury moves back into Scorpio tomorrow, Wednesday, London time at 3:20 a.m. So that means if you're in the United States, then this evening Mercury goes back into Scorpio. And so Mercury going back into Scorpio, is a change. And what it might mean is that you become more reflective, and you're thinking about things in a different way, and you were perhaps ready to do something. You thought everything was in order, and now you're thinking, well, maybe not. Maybe it's not in order at all. And so there is an advantage of Mercury going retrograde, going back into Scorpio, and when you're thinking about what you're going to be doing over the next few days, then perhaps what is needed is some good organization. Things have to be cleared out, and maybe it's just been going on for too long. You thought you'd missed your chance, or you thought you'd moved on, and now with Mercury going retrograde, about to go back into Scorpio, it could be that something is trying to pull you back. Not so fast. There's something you haven't finished, and it's not that you have to listen to what another person tells you. You can listen to yourself. You know what hasn't been finished, and so that's definitely something you need to be thinking about over the next few days. Indeed, while the moon is in Scorpio, in particular, while the moon is in Scorpio, you do have a chance to stay where you are, and maybe that's what Geminis need to do. Stay where you are. Make sure that your own personal space, where you're living, where you're existing, where you're functioning, it is just as clear as possible. And I'm not just talking about physical obstruction. It's emotional obstruction, garbage from the past. It has been piling up, and now with the moon in Scorpio, it's a time maybe to shed your skin. I know you're not a Scorpio, but maybe Gemini, with the Mercury about to move back into Scorpio, you're about to become an honorary Scorpio, a temporary Scorpio as well, an honorary and a temporary Scorpio. I mean, one image we of course have with Scorpios is shedding their skin. The idea of a Scorpio in the form of a snake hiding under a rock, shedding its skin, and just waiting. And when it's ready, good and ready, it will come back out of that rock. The new Gemini. I mean, that's what Gemini's like. I mean, Geminis do like the idea of reinvention, and maybe that's what's happening at the moment. With Mercury, Mercury going retrograde, and it goes back into Scorpio. Eventually it will go stationary direct. In fact, it will go stationary direct, pretty soon. And I think it's on November the 30th, off the top of my head, that Mercury goes stationary direct, and then it will move on and move into Sagittarius. So perhaps that's what you should be thinking about: changing yourself and making sure that wherever you are, it is well organized, and that you're not too much tied to the past, too much tied to the garbage of the past. And so that's something today and tomorrow that you can start to sort out. Cancer. The moon is moving through Scorpio. That's one thing going on today. We also have a sesquiquadrate between Mars and Jupiter. And, if you put those together, Cancer, it might be a time where you do feel that you want to do something. I don't think you're going to just want to just vegetate, stay in one place, doing nothing. You are aware that in certain areas, action is required. Not just because there's external pressure. It's because you feel you want to do something. You want to do something positive, and most importantly, something that you can enjoy. And with the moon moving into Scorpio, starting to make a conjunction to Venus, you can see what you enjoy. You have an idea about what you'd like to be doing and who you would like to be with. And ideally, things will be as straightforward as possible, even though the moon is moving into Scorpio, because I do think that Cancerians, and perhaps some the other water signs, perceive the Scorpio in a different way from other people. Me, from a Gemini perspective, might see Scorpio as being, quite a difficult sign. Even though I'm surrounded by, well, I was when I was a child. I was surrounded by Scorpios. I mean, I'm making this recording on November the 17th. It's my father's would be my father's birthday. I think my father's 103rd birthday, and I've got my mother and my brother and my sister. My mother's dead now, but they've all got their birthdays on the 20th, which is 20th of November. So that's I'm kind of sort of familiar with that Scorpio energy, but it can be problematic, and it can be perhaps misleading. And so you, as a Cancer, you can see it in a different way. And for you, Scorpio is not a particularly complicated energy. It's fairly straightforward and even liberating. And so with the moon starting to make a conjunction to Venus, that Venus might be conjunct, might be exact. That Moon Venus conjunction might be exact tomorrow. That despite that, you are aware of things that you would like to be doing. And so it's a good time to be enjoying yourself in your own way, and not feeling that you have to do things other people's way, even if other people are trying to spring surprises on you, because you've got the Sun starting to make an opposition to Uranus, and I'll be talking about that over the next few days. But the Sun opposition Uranus, might well be about certain people trying to get your attention, trying to get you to do things their way, because if they get your attention, if they try to give the impression that something is going on, that there's a huge amount of drama, then the idea is that you'd have to drop everything and worry about what other people are worrying about. And that's something, Scorpio, that you don't, sorry, I'm not talking to Scorpio, I'm talking to Cancer. It's all those Scorpio planets. That's something, Cancer, that you might do. So if I have been referring to you as Scorpio, every now and then, my apologies. I do know you're a Cancerian. And so don't allow yourself to be fazed by what's happening around you. Don't allow yourself to be panicked, being persuaded that you should do something that you don't really want to do. And instead, take advantage of what's available. There is still this grand trine in water signs. It's a great grand trine. In fact, this grand trine in water signs, I did talk about it yesterday in my video for Monday, the fact that the Sun was trine Jupiter, trine Saturn, but it's coming into force with added strength, even though the Sun is sort of moving away from the trine between Jupiter and Saturn, and it's because of the Moon. So the Moon is in Scorpio now, the moon and the sun and the moon are in Scorpio, are both in Scorpio. So we've got the run up to the new moon. We've got a new moon coming up at, when is it? So 29 Scorpio, is it? I think that's when the new moon is. The new moon is, let me just check, 28. So the new moon is at 28 Scorpio, and so it's making a trine to Jupiter, trine to Saturn. So from your perspective, Cancer, I think that is very positive. It allows things to move, and it allows you to make the most of who you are. And you don't feel over the next few days around the time of this new moon, because the new moon really has started now, don't feel that you have to give anything up or that you have to give anything away, because things are moving and you understand what's happening. And it's not about things being overly intense, having to be worried about anything. It's just about the full creative force of the emotional universe, and you being able to really enjoy it. And it's not about pressure. It's about the absolute ease of you just being yourself. And given all of that, there's a great chance today and over the next couple of days that relationships can blossom, provided it all happens on your terms. And there are many sort of emotional linkages here which could be activated, and one emotion can easily lead to another emotion. So the right relationship can really work very well. Well, of course, if you're talking about grand trines in water signs, then at times emotions can get ahead of themselves. So you might then say that if a relationship is flawed or is in trouble, then the grand trine might just intensify what you've already got. And so you might say that a difficult situation could get worse. So perhaps, Cancer, you just have to evaluate the various relationships you're involved in and ask yourself what is working and what is healthy. And if something is working and it is healthy, then I think that this grand trine energy can make things even better. Leo, you have your own charm, very much so. It's quite clear. I mean, if you look at the sun is still in Scorpio. Sun 26, 27 Scorpio. It is on the Venus-Mars midpoint, and you can see the fact that it is on the Venus-Mars midpoint, by eye. There's the sun, there's Venus, and so the sun and Venus are 12 degrees. Is that 12 degrees apart? The sun and Mars, the sun and Mars might be more like 14 degrees apart, but the sun is moving to that halfway point over the next few days, that halfway point between the sun and Mars. And so, the sun does represent you. It is your ruling planet. And so with that Venus-Mars energy, you can get attention, without having to do very much. The sun is in Scorpio. That's where you want to be. And it is a time, Leo, when you don't necessarily feel that you have to be doing anything. And so I'm kind of repeating myself there, because this has been a message for Leos that's been going on for a long time, perhaps the best part of the month. But the sun is nearly out of Scorpio, nearly there, nearly in Sagittarius. And while the sun is in Scorpio, it's not just on the Venus-Mars midpoint. It's, of course, also making a trine to Jupiter, a trine to Saturn. Okay, it's a separating trine, but it's in operation. And so, Leo, you could argue that, there is nothing you have to do. You might feel, or you might be tempted to think that the goal is somewhere else, that the opportunities are somewhere else, that you have to make a special effort, but it might be exhausting, and deep down you just don't want to do it. And so Scorpio, I think it really is okay to stick to what you know and what you trust, and also just be open to new possibilities that can just happen without you having to do anything. And don't forget, Leo, that we've got a run up to a new moon, and this new moon is at 28 Scorpio, and because the sun and the moon are now in the same sign, and this new moon, or at least this run up to the new moon, is about something coming to an end, perhaps a cycle in your life coming to an end. And I don't mean that in a negative way, by the way. It just could have been that, over the last month almost, there were things you had to rebuild. You wanted to make sure that you were psychologically and spiritually healthy. And that process of recharging is just maybe still going on, as the moon moves towards that conjunction. And then things do change with the new moon, because the moment the new moon happens, the sun moves into Sagittarius, and that creates its own excitement. So there are things going on, and if you feel that you're not doing enough, or that you should be doing more, that you should be more sociable, don't worry about it. There's nothing that has to be done. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you should be completely lazy. I mean, you're not lazy, but there is a thing that you can take advantage of. It may be an opportunity. It's right there, and you don't have to go a million miles to find it, because the gold is within reach. And when I say within reach, that just means that you probably don't have to go out of your front door if you don't want to. Virgo, we need to keep an eye on Mercury. And Mercury is important for a Virgo, obviously, because it's your ruler. And Mercury is really getting ready to change signs, to move out of Sagittarius and to retrograde back into Scorpio. In fact, if you are in the United States, then this evening, Mercury moves back into Scorpio. I say United States rather than the Americas, because I think that technically, if you were in, I don't really know about Brazilian time zones, but I think that if you were in Eastern Brazil, that time zone, I think that's only 3 hours. I'm right saying it's only 3 hours behind Greenwich. So even if you're in Eastern Brazil, Mercury is not going to go into Scorpio until the early hours of tomorrow. I might have got that wrong, but yeah, if you are in the United States, you will feel that sign change. But even if you're not in the United States, that Mercury is about to change sign. Might not be today. It might be tomorrow, Wednesday, that it changes sign. And so you're not necessarily ready to do anything, or maybe you shouldn't be ready to do anything with Mercury in this position, because you're not quite sure which way things are going. You're neither in one place or the other. And that does mean that you should have an open mind. And also Mercury is starting to get quite close to the sun, and Mercury moving close to the sun, particularly when it's retrograde, can be a problem. You want to be able to see straight. You want to be able to think straight. You don't want to be just blotted out by something that is just completely beyond you. And when Mercury changes sign, it is right there. It's conjunct the sun, and it might be difficult to make sense of anything. And when you're in that situation, Virgo, it's probably best to do nothing. Certainly not to make your mind up about anything. and not at the same time to be overwhelmed. So if you feel that things are just too much, but you can't concentrate, that you can't make decisions, just accept that situation over the next couple of days. It's just something temporary, and instead you can observe, you can become aware of how complicated things are. But doesn't mean to say that you need be negatively impacted by it. Far from it. So I think that's the right approach. I don't even think it's negative. I think that it's perhaps a time where you can just have another look at things and realize that what you thought was straightforward isn't straightforward at all. And at the same time, your mind can develop, your mind can work on things, and can have another look at material. Perhaps you thought it was straightforward, you now realize it's not straightforward at all, and you can just get an idea about it all. And I think that is something that is, as far as I'm concerned, pretty positive. Now, we do have one aspect we do have today, which is Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter. So, this Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter aspect, it could be slightly irritating. Something happening that you are not really very interested in. You don't really want to be bothered by it, but it's there. And you have to deal with it. It could be someone else's behavior. Someone behaves in a way that you don't necessarily appreciate, or they make you think about something. You thought you'd worked it all out, and then you're presented with something else. Someone says something, and your immediate reaction might be to resist what you hear, and even to get a bit angry about it. And I would just suggest that you don't have that reaction. You can hear all sorts of things. And if you hear something that is challenging, that maybe seems to focus on what is important to you, then of course you're going to resist it. And it doesn't mean that it's right. It just means that there is that possibility that you've got something wrong, and just consider that possibility, and don't get upset by what people say and what people do, and just don't necessarily think that you have to be involved in a conflict, but you even have to argue. I mean, you might want to argue about something, you might want to pick up on some small detail that someone has said. Maybe they've got some small detail wrong, you want to pick up on it, but I would suggest you don't. Just let it pass, and don't take things too personally today. Libra. Venus is your ruler, of course, and Venus is making a sesquiquadrate to Neptune. And this sesquiquadrate to Neptune has its problems, or it could have its problems. So if you think about Venus, well, of course it is your ruling planet, and it's currently moving through Scorpio, and so there is a possibility that you could be deceived. You could deceive yourself. You could see something that looks interesting, and you just buy it. For example, there might be some sort of financial expenditure there based on an illusion. I mean, you know how it is. I had to buy something recently, and I looked for reviews, and I got fooled by the advertising. This product, I think it was a car pump, and this car pump was just everywhere. It was just all over the internet. You just couldn't get past the advertising. And the moment I bought it, I knew that I shouldn't have bought it, and I'm still trying to work out whether or not I should send it back. I can see the advantages, but you've basically been deceived by something which has a financial impact. Okay, me having to pay for a car pump. I didn't really want to pay for this car pump. So there's an annoying feeling there, the feeling that I've somehow been fooled by a saturation advertising campaign. Me? I mean, that's not how it should be. And so with Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune, when it comes to money and expenditure, just don't be fooled. And I'm not saying that you're going to be deceived. It's just that you might just take something as at face value, and you'll perhaps spend money on it, and only later will you realize that you've made a mistake. So perhaps with Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune, you should avoid spending money on things that you don't absolutely need. Okay, if you need it right now, if you need it today, you've got to eat. I mean, sure, but or a bill has to be paid. But unnecessary money, unnecessary expenditure which hasn't been planned, should really be avoided with Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune. And with Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune, also, be wary of what you're being told, what other people are doing, because, they could trip you up. And, additionally, Libra, you might, for some reason, be looking for fast solutions to make yourself feel better. You have an idea about the way things should be, and it's slow. And you're not getting the support you expected, and so as a result, you might want to do something to make it all happen, and that's not the right thing to do either. Just because you have a vision doesn't mean to say that other people are going to share that vision. They might even share that vision, but they're not prepared to go as far as you are in terms of it, because perhaps you find that certain people are rooted in the past and they're stuck. And I would just suggest, Libra, that you accept people as they are, and don't try to rush things. Don't try to resolve things. It's not a good time to be resolving anything, particularly under pressure. So how does one describe that? Not a good time for sort of shotgun resolutions. Not really. If something is ambiguous, then it needs to just be accepted. That is the way it is, and the ambiguities will resolve themselves in their own time. And this might be connected with Mercury going retrograde. Mercury is still retrograde. Mercury is currently in Sagittarius, but as early as this evening, it might go into Scorpio, and Mercury will stay retrograde until the end of the month. I think Mercury goes stationary direct, right at the end of the month, November the 30th. And so that might just be that point of just not understanding exactly how things are going. And it could be that a delay might be a blessing in disguise. So if something does get delayed today, or maybe tomorrow, you hear that something's just not going to happen, your first impulse might be to be annoyed and feel frustrated. But it's good, probably, if something gets delayed, because the time is not right. And that gives you just more time to work out what's going on, to prepare yourself. And you should not be frustrated. You should be pleased that you have a chance to really get things right. And finally, I should remind you that the grand trine in water signs that I was talking about yesterday, it's still there. And part of this grand trine in water signs is the Sun making a trine to Jupiter. And Jupiter's in Cancer. Jupiter is a planet that can really work in your favor at the moment while it's in Cancer. And with the Sun trine Jupiter, there is a process here of being able to do something which aligns you to the future. And it's nothing complicated, it's nothing dramatic. You can see which way things are going, and you could subtly do something which puts you in a position to benefit, perhaps financially, when things change at a later stage. We may be talking, a few days, maybe talking, when Mercury goes direct at the end of the month. Whenever that change happens, you can just put yourself in a position where you can benefit. But I don't think you're necessarily going to get the benefit today. Scorpio. Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter. Mars is also conjunct the fixed star Antares. And so with those two placements, well, I don't know, sesquiquadrate Jupiter is not really a placement, but given the condition of Mars, you might be in the mood for action. You might want to make things happen. And Scorpio can sometimes be quite a passive sign, can sort of hold back, doesn't want to be in the center of things, doesn't want to draw attention to itself. But every Scorpio has their moment, and it just could be that you feel that now is the time, that you have a real chance here. And that's good, but you mustn't forget that Mars conjunct Antares and sesquiquadrate Jupiter can just be in too much of a hurry. And also there's a slightly aggressive feel. I don't even know if it's a slightly aggressive feel. It may be a very aggressive feel, depending on what kind of Scorpio you are. You're almost ready for a fight. You're ready for a conflict. And if anyone sort of contradicts you, then you're going to fight back, and you're going to want to make your point. And in the process, you might cause a lot of disruption. But is it really necessary? The moon is now in Scorpio. The moon is starting to make a conjunction to Venus, and Moon-Venus conjunction in Scorpio. It's a pleasant conjunction, particularly in your hands. Not everyone can deal with this moon conjunct Venus in Scorpio, but you can. And I think that allows you to be quite diplomatic. I don't think you necessarily want to be diplomatic. You're quite happy to go to war. But, diplomacy is part of a process, should be part of a process. War is diplomacy by other means, politics by other means. War is just a way of doing things, a way of trying to get agreement your way, trying to get everyone to see things from your viewpoint. And if other people compromise, give in, well, you don't have to go to war, do you? And with Moon conjunct Venus, I think that you are quite persuasive if you want to be, and you can put people at their ease. Amazingly, you can, and that might be the first thing you should do. And in that way, you can save yourself a lot of trouble. And at the same time, well, we have got Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter, and this Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter, it may well act out of frustration. And one reason for that is if you look at this Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter, let me just show you the Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter. So here's the Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter, which I do think this aspect really does have an impact on you. And if we look at the 90-degree dial of this Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter, so Mars is sesquiquadrate Jupiter, so that means that on the 90-degree dial, the Mars Jupiter is shown as an opposition. So if we put the pointer on the Jupiter, we can see that this Mars Jupiter sesquiquadrate takes place on the Sun Saturn midpoint. So there is that Sun-Saturn midpoint. And so this kind of indicates that your desire to create action with Mars sesquiquadrate Saturn and Mars conjunct Antares may to an extent be born out of frustration. You want something to happen, you want people to give in, you want to get your way, and Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter, might be about finally snapping. You feel this is it, this is your moment. But in the process, it's just important that you don't lose your cool, and you consider that there are many ways of doing things, and the first way should always be about diplomacy. And also with Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter, you are looking for more. And if you are looking for more, Scorpio, you may be quite aware of what has been holding you back, and perhaps what people have been holding you back. And with Mars and Jupiter, both being on the Sun-Saturn midpoint, when one thinks about Sun-Saturn, one might be thinking about breaking something off, or the idea of a farewell or a goodbye. And so if you feel that something is holding you back, you might think, well, now might be the time to cut the ties, and you don't have to make a big drama about it. But to what extent do you want to go down that road? Do you really want to never see someone again, or is it just a question of distance? There's no need to be extreme. Perhaps certain people have got too close to you, and now it's time to just create some distance without creating a drama about it. And one reason why you might feel that other people could be a problem is because we don't just have Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter, we have Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune, and with Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune, there are people out there who are very difficult to understand. It's very difficult to make them out, and even when they are making a special effort to be open and honest, it doesn't make any difference. Now it could be that certain people just don't know how to express themselves, or they're just holding something back, or they're just confused, or in a minority of cases they might just be lying. Some people do lie, and if someone is lying, if someone is blatantly telling the truth, if someone is blatantly telling you something that is untrue, then perhaps you need to consider, what's it all about? Sagittarius. Mercury is not going to be in your sign for much longer. Mercury is getting ready to leave and move into Scorpio, and that movement may happen this evening, late this evening if you're in the Americas. Okay, not so quite so late if you're in Alaska or Hawaii, but with Mercury moving out of Sagittarius, there is for a time less emphasis on your sign. Maybe you feel that temporarily you lose some of your spark, and that might bother you. And if you feel that you're losing your spark, well, then you might want to respond. And we do have Mars making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter. So Mars is in Sagittarius. So when Mercury leaves Sagittarius, there'll just be one planet in Sagittarius for a short period of time. So Mars will be in Sagittarius, and you might then feel that you have to make a special effort, that you have to go above and beyond in order to make an impression. But there is a risk with Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter that you just take things too far. And Sagittarians can take things too far. That can be a Sagittarian trait. You regard something as being important. You give it everything you've got, and you start to escalate. And the question is, where is it all going? And so with Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter, yeah, it's possible you just take something too seriously, and you just feel that you have to make an impression, you have to say something, and as a result, things could get out of hand. And so I would suggest, Sagittarius, that you, as far as possible, try to calm things down. And I think this is something that you can do. I mean, Mars might be sesquiquadrate Jupiter. That's true, that's going to affect you. But this Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter is on the Sun Saturn midpoint, or at least it's aspecting the Sun Saturn midpoint. And so Sun Saturn is a restraining influence. And so you don't have to necessarily take things too far. And it just may be that at a certain point, Sagittarius, you realize that enough is enough, that you don't have to do everything you want to do right now. And perhaps some of your energy, and you do have a lot of energy at the moment, can be thrown into something constructive, something that is well defined, that is also safe. So that may be what you need to be doing. You think about structure, and you have to be certainly aware that you have got a lot of energy. I would say that you might think about exercise. You might think about exercise, but again, you don't want to take things too far. Mars is sesquiquadrate Jupiter, and it's on the fixed star Antares. So if you exercise, you might push yourself, and that might not be such a good thing, at least on a physical level. So as far as possible, Sagittarius, I would recommend that you try to be quite moderate, that things do need to be moderated, and you need to avoid the extremes. I mean, the extremes can be fun, and you can get action on the extremes. And certainly, if you're saying things that are extreme, you do get a response. But if you're trying to sustain things and sustain your energy levels, then it would probably be best if you made some effort to moderate yourself. And going back to Mercury moving into Scorpio, Mercury getting ready to move into Scorpio, that movement might well say something about relationships. The image of Mercury moving out of Sagittarius, is the image of maybe someone moving out of your space, someone moving out of sight, maybe a person who you've had a lot to do with recently, and now they're making their exit. It's a temporary exit, because Mercury next month does go back into Sagittarius. But it could be that someone just wants to move away from you temporarily, and you therefore shouldn't get too upset about it. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe someone needs to do some work on themselves. They might have other things that they need to do, and short term you've had enough of them, and they'll come back if you want them to come back. So it's certainly not a time to be possessive about other people, or to be worried about what other people are doing. And distance in many respects can be a good thing. Capricorn, it's probably best if you try to play on your strengths, and to focus on what is good about the current astrological situation. And what is good about what's happening right now is the fact that we've got this grand trine in water signs, and this grand trine is around for the next couple of days even. But I did talk about this grand trine involving the Sun in Scorpio, Jupiter in Cancer, Saturn in Pisces. Remember, Saturn in Pisces, Saturn is your ruler, and this grand trine is still around. It's still in operation, and you could argue that it's going to be intensified over the next couple of days, because we've got a new moon coming up, and this new moon takes place at 28 Scorpio. So the new moon is is trine Jupiter, it's trine Saturn. So the new moon is going to be part of this grand trine. I mean, I'll be talking about the new moon in sort of more detail in a couple of days' time. But the thing about this grand trine is the fact that the Sun is trine Saturn, Jupiter is trine Saturn. So you are given a real lift by all of this, and it needn't be difficult. And that's the key point. It shouldn't be difficult. If something is difficult, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it. If you have to ask too many questions, if something is frustrating, why bother with it? I don't think you have to bother with it at all. And if you look with it from a grand trine perspective, this perspective, you look at Saturn, you look at Sun and Jupiter, you can see that Saturn is on the Sun-Jupiter midpoint. This midpoint is, in my opinion, pretty fortunate. You think about Sun-Jupiter, you think about expansion and a vision, and also just being optimistic. So Capricorn, you can look at what's going on around you, and you can be confident that with the right moves, things can happen in a way that very much works in your favor. So really try to focus on the grand trine and its energy. And as I've said, if something is easy, then you should go with it. Why would you want something to be difficult? Sometimes one might think that if something is difficult, then it's worthwhile and is the right thing to be doing, and the easy thing should be avoided. But no, make it easy, make it simple, and that is the right way forward. And avoid the potential stress of the day. Mars is making a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter. I don't think you need to worry about that Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter if you stay away from it. But I'm not saying it won't manifest. I mean, Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter could be about something bothering you. You perhaps overinterpret another person's actions. You think about them too much. You feel that you have to respond. You're not quite sure how to respond, but you just feel you've got to do something, you've got to say something, and it feels difficult. And of course, if something feels difficult, then it should be probably avoided. And likewise, we've also got Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune. Venus sesquiquadrate Neptune is a confusing influence, and there may be, if you're not careful, times today where you're not quite sure where you're going, and you're asking yourself a lot of questions. And is this really the right thing to be doing? And why would that be the case? Well, that would be the case perhaps if you're thinking too much about what society wants, what other people want. If you try to follow rather than lead. Yeah, if you do try to follow and you try to do what you're told, then things might not be easy at all. Again, complications should be avoided. And as far as is possible, you should do things according to your own rules, according to your own agenda. And in that way, I'm confident that things will start to move, and move easily. I mean, that's the key point. And as far as other people and relationships are concerned, people can be a problem, they can be an advantage. It depends how you deal with them. If you make people a problem, if you allow them to get under your skin, if you take them too seriously, if you listen too carefully to their directions, they're rather confusing directions, actually. If you do that, then other people could be a problem. But if you just instead, you go with the flow, you don't regard any one person as being too significant. Everyone is, part of the changing scenery. That I think is the right approach. And you can have, I think, a great social life. provided nothing is taken seriously. And so in that sense, Capricorn, a light-hearted approach may go a long way to creating what should be a pretty fortunate day. Aquarius. Scorpio just doesn't really go away, does it? I mean, Scorpio's just been around for a long time, and even though the sun is getting ready to leave Scorpio, you've got Mercury about to enter Scorpio or re-enter Scorpio. So Mercury has been in Sagittarius and still in Sagittarius just about, but it's retrograde and it's getting ready to move into Scorpio. So there will be a time when you've got the moon in Scorpio, you've got Venus in Scorpio, you've got Mercury in Scorpio, and you've got the sun in Scorpio. So you've got 4 traditional planets in Scorpio, plus you've got true black moon Lilith. And with that energy in Scorpio, you are reminded that you have a goal. The year is not over yet. There's still 6 weeks left of 2025, and there's a lot that can be accomplished. You do not have to slow down. Maybe other people are slowing down. You don't have to slow down. You can just keep going, and whatever it is that you're working on that you feel is important to you, I really would suggest that you really you keep going. And even though now we've got the moon deeply waning, we're coming to the end of a lunar cycle, but we've got a new moon coming up on the 20th, I think. So today's the 18th, so 2 days time we've got a new moon. That new moon is at 28 degrees Scorpio. So again, more Scorpio. And Scorpio is a fixed sign. It's intense, it's passionate about what it's doing, and that's the way you should be. And don't lose the concentration, don't lose the intensity. And as far as other people are concerned, other people are to an extent there to serve you, or at least to make things easy for you. Okay, serve is possibly the wrong word, but other people can be there at your disposal. And we still have a trine between the Sun and Saturn. As I said yesterday, but Sun-Saturn trine can be about relationships in the Aquarian chart, because the sun rules Leo, your opposite sign. Of course, Saturn is your ruler. So Sun trine Saturn, relationships continue to go well, helped by the fact that Jupiter is involved. That you've got Sun, Jupiter, Saturn, grand trine. And so, think about what other people are offering. How are they making things better for you? How are they making things easier? And you don't have to put up with anyone, making your life difficult. It's all about creating possibilities. And so, if you're in a relationship with Sun trine Saturn, I'm confident that it can go well. You can also find that you are respected. So in terms of your ambitions, what you're trying to do, perhaps another person can facilitate this. So if you're going into work, then that means that there may be people there who can help you. Or if you're trying to set something up, you don't necessarily have to do it all on your own, because that Sun trine Saturn can provide help, where you need it. So overall, Aquarius, I think that it's looking like a good day when you just continue to have focus, and you might, the moon is waning, you might feel that something is coming to an end, and that maybe you should be slowing down because something is coming to an end. But I would say no. I think it's just the process before a restart, and perhaps that's what the new moon is about, a restart, and going back over something you've maybe done before. Okay, Mercury is still retrograde, but Mercury is retrograding back into Scorpio. And so if you feel you've missed something recently, don't worry, because you're going to definitely get another chance. Pisces. Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter. That is arguably the main aspect of the day. And that aspect is of relevance to you because Jupiter's your ruling planet. And with Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter, that might refer to an irritation, something bothering you, something that requires your attention. You don't really want to give it your attention, but you might not have a choice. Now, when I've described this Mars Jupiter sesquiquadrate so far, I've been somewhat negative about it because Mars Jupiter, you put them together and you get a lot of energy. And the question is, what do you do with that energy? Do you have anything constructive to do with it? And the answer is possibly not. And you could just expend a lot of energy on absolutely nothing, and in the process you could create difficulties for yourself. And so that's a way of looking at it. But Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter, it is a dynamic aspect, and there's nothing wrong with dynamism. In the Pisces world, you need dynamism because it can be just so easy to just drift around, drift on a tide, not going anywhere specific. And sometimes that dynamism can be useful, and you're encouraged to take things to the next level. And I think that's perhaps how this Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter is about. Mars, it's in Sagittarius. It's conjunct Antares. Okay, Antares is a difficult fixed star, but it's not a low energy fixed star. It can make things happen. There is some scope for Mars conjunct Antares to take the initiative with dramatic and fortunate results. And maybe the Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter is encouraging you to do something. And the question is, what is it encouraging you to do? And probably there are always two paths. There's the path which, it might be easy, but it's very disruptive and you haven't really thought it through. There's the other path where you can actually take the Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter and you can channel it. And if we're talking about channeling the Mars Jupiter, let me just show you the 90-degree dial to show you what I mean. So if we look at the 90-degree dial, I wasn't sure whether or not to have the Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter as the main theme of the day or Zelensky, and I decided to go for Zelensky instead. But still, I do want to tell you about this Mars Jupiter. So there's Jupiter, sesquiquadrate Mars. On a 90-degree dial, a sesquiquadrate always shows as an opposition. And this Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter is on the Sun-Saturn midpoint. You see, there's a Sun-Saturn midpoint. The Sun-Saturn midpoint is at 25 Capricorn. So that means that Jupiter is opposition the Sun-Saturn midpoint, and Mars is semi-square. So that Sun-Saturn is about structure. And so the key point with this Mars-Jupiter aspect is it's certainly not to be frustrated, to feel, you've got all this energy, what are you going to do with it? Okay, Sun-Saturn could be about frustration, but it could also be about taking something that you have and deciding where you want to focus it. And if you can have focus, okay, at the beginning it might be a bit difficult to make progress, but I think in the end you will, and to use that energy of that Mars Jupiter in a constructive way. It is about taking what you're good at, what you're brilliant at even, and just throwing it into the achievements of your various aims and goals, whatever they might be. So that's perhaps the key point, Pisces. It is about focus. And one other point Mercury is leaving Sagittarius. And with Mercury leaving Sagittarius, okay, it might happen late this evening if you're in the United States, or tomorrow if you're elsewhere. But with Mercury leaving Sagittarius, you might be inclined to think that an opportunity is going. That you thought you had an opportunity, you thought something was there for you, and now it's gone. And that might represent sort of a moment of panic. You perhaps feel you've lost an ally, you've lost a chance, and the assistance is not there as it should be. Don't worry about it. It may just be that something has gone. Maybe someone has gone, and they are coming back, but they're gone for a reason. Maybe they're gone because it's time for you to work something out on your own, not feeling that you have to always be reliant. But whatever has gone, if it's important to you, if it really does matter, don't worry, Pisces. It will come back, probably sometime in December. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it's time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 49, which is revolution. Revolution indicates a substantial change. And revolution is important, even in a Confucian world. I Ching is, of course, a Confucian oracle. It's looking about order and how society works, and making sure that the various components of society are all connecting together. So revolution happens because it's needed in order to maintain the system, because every now and then you need a clear out. And this revolution may say something about what you want to do in your world. It doesn't necessarily need to involve anyone. Okay, it might be that you want to overthrow your country's government. I wouldn't sort of recommend that course of action. It depends on your situation, doesn't it? And who you are. I assume most people watching this video, indeed everyone probably watching this video, is not in a position to overthrow their country's government. But it's in the air, and you're in the mood for change. And the question is, how do you manage this change, and what is the structure of this change? And we have 3 moving lines, and I should also say that we have a Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter today, and Mars sesquiquadrate Jupiter can be about there being a lot of energy, a lot of action. We really want to make an impression, but it's a difficult aspect, and it can mean that we just take something too far, or we project our energy just into the wrong areas. So that is something that we have to be concerned about. Now, we have 3 moving lines. Bottom line moves. And with a bottom line moving, which is what very often we see in the I Ching, with the bottom line moving, it's often an idea of something being too early. Things aren't in the right place. And so if we are tempted to do something dramatic, in the first instance, we need to wait. Perhaps we need to just find out more, find out what's going on. If we just act in a dramatic way without thinking it through, things could go wrong. Then the second line moves. And the second line is saying, well, something's going on. We do need a change. And, why do you have a revolution? You don't just have a revolution for the sake of it. You think about it very carefully. But there comes a point when there is no alternative. I mean, I don't know if you've been watching, British politics, if you were a Labour member of Parliament, Labour is a governing party in Britain, and you've got Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, you probably need a revolution. You probably need to get rid of Keir Starmer. I mean, the alternatives may not be great, but he's not functioning well as a Prime Minister. So in our lives, perhaps on a more local, supposedly trivial level, there may just come a point where something just has to change. And it's a matter of obligation. And that's when we institute a revolution. It's not a casual thing. We don't do it on the spur of a moment. We wait for as long as possible. When that moment arrives, we have to do it, and there's no choice. And so, I know this is just an I Ching for today, just another Tuesday. It doesn't apply to tomorrow. So perhaps you should be thinking about the sphere of your operations today. It could just be you staying at home, not doing anything. It could be you involved in important things. Maybe you are important. Maybe you're a prime minister. I don't know who you are. But think about your sphere of operations, however supposedly lowly they are, or however grand they are, and just think about how things change and where change might be required. And then the fifth line moves. And this fifth line talks about a tiger, and it aligns us with the tiger. And the tiger, it's saying the tiger is ready. This is the revolution itself. This is the moment to have a revolution. And it says you have a revolution because you have the support of the people. If that's a real moment, when you have the support of the people. When the people are with you, it can't fail. I don't know what the people is. It depends on your situation, but there will come a moment where it is the right thing and you create a radical change. Maybe some confrontation is required. That very often happens in revolutions. People who think they're right are not right, and people sometimes need to be overthrown. So on your own day, it all works out. You change, you become the tiger, you become in a position, you are in a position to bring about this revolution, whatever that revolution might be. And then three moving lines means we move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 32, which is duration. And with duration, once we've stirred things up, once we've really started to break things, maybe we have to think about the future. It's no good just having a flash in the pan revolution. You've got to see it through. You've got to see it through to completion. You've got to stay with it. So if you start something, you've got to make sure you finish it. It's not enough to disrupt something, because if you just disrupt it, you've just made things worse. What are you going to put in its place? And that is the question. And that's what you can do. And that's why I think duration is a very positive hexagram. Okay, in a way, it's not exciting, but you can't have constant excitement. Revolution is the exciting hexagram. Duration is what you do afterwards. And you stir things up, you make changes, maybe you even upset people, and then you deal with the consequences and you put things back together. And that is, I think, the meaning of this hexagram, duration. And now I want to look at Volodymyr Zelensky. I haven't looked at his chart for some time, so I thought it would be a good idea to do an update. It's always a problem with Volodymyr Zelensky. I mean, he is someone who is very popular in the West. A lot of people think he's wonderful. They did think he was wonderful, but his popularity is wearing thin, and the problem, one recent problem he has is the fact that you've got this corruption scandal. Well, there's always some corruption going on in Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine is a very corrupt country, but now you're dealing with sizable sums of money, which people close to him have been sort of siphoning off, and people in the West are questioning, what is this regime we've been supporting? I mean, they don't care; they'll carry on supporting it, but members of the public, seeing it, and so the issue of corruption has certainly come up. Plus, you've got the war, and as far as the war is concerned, whatever, the more sort of optimistic sections of the Western press are saying, the war is going very, very badly, and it does seem that the front line is starting to break down. And of course, we've heard this before, and this war is getting on for 4 years old. And so, and also with Zelensky, if we look at Zelensky's chart, I've looked at his chart a great deal, but one thing about Zelensky's horoscope is that he has a lot of planets in fixed signs. He's got Sun and Venus in Aquarius. He's got Moon. He's got Mars, Moon, and Saturn in Leo. So he's got 5 of the 7 traditional planets in fixed signs. And once he decides on something, he just goes for it, and he has stayed in power for a long time. That can be about fixity. Fixity doesn't like change, and perhaps at some level, fixity has real willpower. Even after his presidential term expired, some would argue that he's not Ukraine's legal president. Certainly Russians would, I think, argue that. But he just keeps going, and you can see the fixity in some of his military decisions. He doesn't like to give up ground, even when he's surrounded, like current situation in is it Pokrovsk and these places where the Ukrainians are pretty much surrounded and just being squeezed. But every now and then one needs to think about what is going on in his life, and of course this is fundamentally sort of connected with Ukraine and the horoscope of Ukraine. And if you look at his chart, one thing that comes to mind is his son. So his son, he was born. The time we have is 2 p.m. for Zelensky, and what one might ask oneself is, the sun is going to set at some stage on Zelensky. The sun will set, and the question is, when is sunset? And if this kind of links to primary directions, so with primary directions, you move the Earth. 1 degree equals 1 year, and so the question is, between the time Zelensky was born on January 25th, 1978, in Kryvyi Rog in Ukraine, how long before the sun gets onto the descendant? Well, the sun set when he was born, I believe, at 5:29 p.m. And so how many degrees would the Earth have to turn? And so, the answer is it's approximately 50 degrees. So he is 47 years old. So if we take one, he's just turned 47. If we turn the Earth 47 degrees, what does it look like? So if we turn the Earth 47 degrees, after he was born, you can see that the sun is starting to set, and Mars has already crossed the horizon. So Mars actually crossed the horizon by primary direction in 2018. So that was a year before he became president. I think he became president in 2019. So this is an example of Mars crossing the horizon by primary direction, in a way that was quite fortunate. And then when the sun crosses a descendant, well, that doesn't happen until 2030. But the problem one has here is that with primary directions, you need a time of birth. You don't just need a time of birth, you need an accurate time of birth. And with Zelensky, if you look at Zelensky's chart, he was born at 2 in the his given time is 2 in the afternoon. Now 2 in the afternoon is a very round time. It could be 5 to 2, it could be 5 past 2, it could even be 10 to 2. So we don't know for sure how accurate his birth time is, but at some stage the sun is going to set, and we just see how many degrees does the Earth have to turn. And likewise, with Mars, looks as if if we take 2 p.m. Mars crossing his ascendant, Mars, in other words, he was born with Mars below the horizon. So when Mars arose, that was when Zelensky hit prominence. And so, I think that primary directions do provide, a good framework for what is happening, although they do need, a fairly sort of accurate time of birth. I mean, ideally, the time of birth should be to within a minute, certainly 5 minutes, but because all things being equal, I think that you'd find that approximately every 4 minutes out, your forecast is going to be 1 year out. So that can be a problem. Now, as far as so if we did have an accurate time of birth, and we look at these 2 planets, the fact that he's because Zelensky has a Sun opposition Mars, and so when that Sun Mars opposition hits things, things can happen. And the beginning of 2026, if we have an accurate time of birth, we have the Sun and Mars making a rapt parallel to the midheaven. Let's just unpack that. It's a mundane rapt parallel to the midheaven. So when we're talking about mundane, it means we're not following the degrees, we're following the houses. So the Sun and Mars are going to be on either side of a midheaven, again, not by degrees, but just by following the houses. So the Sun will be approximately 3 degrees, the Sun will be approximately 3 houses to one side of a midheaven, and Mars will be approximately 3 houses on the other side of the midheaven. So that's why you've got a mundane rapt parallel. I'm sorry, that sounds rather complicated, but if you think about it, Sun and Mars hitting his midheaven at the same time, that potentially could be difficult and could be career ending. And certainly it seems that his presidency has got to be coming to an end. I mean, he's losing this war, and I think there is an argument that Zelensky's actions, in some respects, support Russia's interests. I think people think about the Russians might want to get rid of Zelensky, but I don't think they will. I think that they want to keep him there as long as possible, because his military decisions, and indeed his diplomatic decisions, they've led to a lot of people dying, but I think that they've kind of supported Russia's strategic purposes, and they're kind of a counterbalance to Putin's weakness, which of course Putin's weakness is that he is rather too keen to compromise with the West, and particularly with America. But as far as other things going on in his chart are concerned, I will look at his directions. I'll look at his directions first, because it kind of links with his, that's his primary directions. There's also his solar arc directions. So here are his solar arc directions. Remember, he's sort of 47 years old, or is that right? 47 years old. So he's going to be 48. So we sort of moved this nearly 40 degrees. So if we move all his planets 48 degrees, this is a chart we get to, and so we can compare his solar arc directions with his natal chart. And there are a couple of directions of note. Neptune, his solar arc directed Neptune, is interesting. So Zelensky has a Sun-Venus conjunction in his chart. And I don't know about that Sun-Venus conjunction. Maybe it's working for him. I mean, certainly in terms of, his career as a sort of an actor and a comedian. But it also may say something about his style. And with Sun conjunct Venus, Venus may make him perhaps distant or insensitive. I think it is an insensitive chart. And I've been sort of criticized for this. People say, oh, he's the most sensitive person in the world. But Zelensky doesn't have any water in his chart. And I think that, he has a view and he just stays with that view. And, very often to be an effective general, you do need water. You need to be able to understand the situation. You need to flow with the situation. And I know that he's not a general, but, some of his military promptings have been disastrous. For example, encouraging the Ukrainian military to stay in a position for far longer, than is necessary, and as a result, losing more men than they should have done. But with Neptune conjunct his Venus, Venus is a planet of money, and I'm wondering whether this solar arc directed Neptune on his Venus could be saying something about all the corruption allegations swirling around his regime and swirling around his inner circle, which is certainly not doing his reputation any good. Even his sponsors in the EU and are having to accept that there is a corruption issue in his government. This government they're supporting, this government they're sending billions of dollars to. And his Sun-Mars opposition. So here is his Sun-Mars opposition. Okay, it might seem to be a fairly wide Sun-Mars opposition, is now beginning to hit his ascendant. So you see, the Sun made the solar arc directed Sun made a square to his ascendant, assuming his ascendant is correct, about 2 years ago. It's at 23 and his ascendant is at 21. Mars is approaching the square of his ascendant. So when you look at the Sun-Mars, you're talking about the Sun-Mars midpoint. So the Sun-Mars midpoint is converging on his ascendant. And so that Sun-Mars, which we saw its power at the time in his primary directions, his Sun-Mars could well be causing him trouble now. And Sun-Mars is quite violent. Of course, violence is there all the time with him as president. But what happens when the end comes, when it's time for him to find the exit? But he is a man who is incredibly stubborn, and he has just stayed far longer than many expected, and he just doesn't want to move. But when the time happens, the time will happen. So that's two solar arc directions that are relevant. And additionally, with Zelensky, we have Neptune. Neptune's going stationary. So next month, Neptune goes stationary. It goes stationary at 29-22 of Pisces. So pretty close to the Aries point. And I'm very, very interested in Zelensky's Aries point. I find Zelensky's Aries point fascinating and disturbing as well. So Zelensky's Mars-Saturn midpoint is at 1432 Leo. So there's his Mars, there's his Saturn, and it's at 1422 Leo. So let's just look at his irregular chart. So there's Mars and Saturn. So his Aries point is at 1422 Leo, and so in other words, that point makes. His Mars. Let's say it again. His Mars-Saturn midpoint is at 1432 Leo, which makes a sesquiquadrate to 0 degrees Aries. So he has got Aries sesquiquadrate the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and this says so much about Zelensky, because if you're dealing with Mars Saturn as a whole, you're dealing with death. And on his watch as president of Ukraine, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have died. I mean, I've seen estimates as much as high as 2 million. And Mars Saturn is the death pair, and the Aries point is the collective. It's the world. And so he, as president, had always had the capacity through his decisions to say things which make decisions which lead to huge amounts of death. And I'm thinking in particular of what happened in Istanbul in 2022, when there was a deal on the table between Ukraine and Russia, a deal which, from the perspective of now, looks like a very good deal for Ukraine, but he was pressurized by the West. Boris Johnson made his visit to Kiev, and he decided not to do the deal with the Russians. I think it was a bad deal for Russia in many respects. But Putin wants to compromise with the West. He doesn't want war, and I mean, I don't think that's my understanding of it. And one shouldn't forget that Putin is a Libran, and he's looking for a compromise. That's why he's been spending so much time trying to get on with Trump. I mean, he even had a deal with Trump where Ukraine would give him Donbass, and they'd freeze the rest of the front lines, which was a good deal for Ukraine, and I mean, under the circumstances. But you could say, fortunately for Russia's interests, the West was aggressive. The West didn't want to compromise anything, and in particular, Zelensky was not into compromise. So that kind of worked quite well, didn't it? And at least for Russia, that is. I mean, not necessarily for Russia, losing lives, of course. But as from the point of view of Russia's geopolitical interests, Zelensky's stubbornness was a kind of an antidote to Putin's obsessive need for compromise. And so, as far as Zelensky's chart on this Neptune, so what's the relevance of Neptune? Well, Neptune goes stationary at 2922 Pisces. In other words, it goes stationary very, very close to the sesquiquadrate with Zelensky's Mars-Saturn midpoint. And I just feel that this Mars-Saturn midpoint, in the end, has got to really manifest in a way that damages Zelensky. And it could be that it could be about his own frustrations. Neptune on his Mars-Saturn midpoint, him not knowing what to do, him not being able to deal with the world. I mean, that is one way of looking at it. Perhaps people being aware of how many people have died because of his decisions. And then, of course, next year we've got Saturn moves into Aries. So next year Saturn will be on his Mars-Saturn midpoint. But over the last year, Mars and Saturn have been hitting his Mars-Saturn midpoint by sesquiquadrate, and this has been, of course, the time where the war has gone against him. I mean, of course, in the West, people were claiming it hasn't, but so that is something really that we should be looking out for. And I did look at Zelensky's chart. One interesting thing about Zelensky's horoscope is that going back to his sun and Russia. So here is the horoscope of Russia. It's a horoscope for Russia, and when the flag was, the new Russian flag was raised on December the 25th, 1991, and so Russia's Saturn is at 5 degrees 10 Aquarius. And so if you compare Zelensky with Russia, what is Russia doing to Zelensky? And so there is Russia's Saturn right on Zelensky's sun. And so you might say that the sun is kind of damaging Russia. You might say that, but I wouldn't argue that. I would say that Zelensky's sun in Aquarius is in its detriment. Sun rules Leo. It's in its detriment in Aquarius, and Russia is Saturn. Russia is Saturn in Aquarius, which is so fitting for Russia, and so that Saturn is right on Zelensky's sun and his Venus as well, and that kind of indicates to me that Saturn will eventually grind Zelensky down. But it also might indicate the fact that in some ways Zelensky's presence is strangely good for Russia, because if you'd had a more pragmatic president and a more flexible president, I think that it would have perhaps been easier to make the most of the various opportunities, particularly with diplomatic opportunities. And we do go back to Russia and Ukraine with their attempt for a deal in Istanbul in 2022. So as far as other things are going on with Zelensky has his. If you look at Zelensky's horoscope, going back to his horoscope, Zelensky has his Saturn at 28 Leo. So you could say Saturn is conjunct Regulus. Saturn conjunct Regulus. I mean, Saturn conjunct Regulus, you could see Saturn conjunct Regulus as a rapid rise to power and a rapid fall. And remember that Zelensky, with all that those fixed planets, is someone who doesn't bend, he breaks. I mean, that's how it's going to work, I think, with all that fixity. So that Saturn becomes relevant when we think about the new moon, because we have a new moon coming up on the 20th. It's a 28/12 Scorpio. So that new moon is going to be square Zelensky's Saturn. And it's also going to be having an impact on Ukraine, because if you look at Ukraine's chart, I've got Ukraine's chart somewhere. So there's Ukraine's chart. So Ukraine has its Venus at 28 Leo. So Zelensky's Saturn is conjunct Ukraine, his country's Venus. And that does indicate that there's something about him which is not necessarily good for his country. And Ukraine's Venus is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So Ukraine has locked into its chart Venus square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And Venus might be about money and about how the money is dealt with. And it's interesting that we've got this new moon coming up with Ukraine's Venus on the 8th house cusp, with all these corruption allegations. So money is an issue, but I just don't think that Zelensky's Saturn is really helping Venus. And I think that this new moon is really it is something of a problem. And I don't think there's anything dramatic for Zelensky that I want to talk about here. I mean, that doesn't mean to say that anything dramatic won't happen, but I think there is evidence, with that Sun and with his Sun Mars opposition, both by primary and by solar arc directions. They've been in place for a long time to cause a lot of damage, and so the question is, what is that final trigger going to be? And one sort of final chart, just for fun, is the horoscope of Keir Starmer. And Keir Starmer seems to really like Zelensky. I mean, they seem to get on well with each other. I mean, I think that because Keir Starmer's got so many problems at home that he might regard Zelensky as a distraction. Now, Keir Starmer, like Russia, has his Saturn at 5 degrees Aquarius. So Russia came into being around the time of Keir Starmer's Saturn return. So Keir Starmer was born in 1962. Russia came into being in 1991. So there's a real Saturn link between Starmer and Russia, and we see that Sun and Venus is, that Zelensky's Sun and Venus is right on Starmer's Saturn. So Starmer, how does he see it? Maybe at some level that Saturn represents his kind of wooden personality. Maybe he's often seen as being a wooden personality. I'm not saying there's nothing wooden about Saturn. Well, there can be. I mean, I can be quite wooden actually with my Saturn in Aquarius. I can be a bit, but I don't want to write off a whole generation of people with Saturn and Aquarius. But I've got Saturn square Neptune. Saturn is my problem. I'm not projecting it onto anyone else. But Saturn. So Starmer's Saturn on his Sun, just maybe there's something about Zelensky that brightens him up, can get through to that Saturn, can help him to relax. He can put his arm around Zelensky. Maybe that's how the Zelensky's Sun-Venus conjunction on the Saturn is working. But I will be looking again at Zelensky's chart. Oh, look at Starmer's Mercury. Starmer's Mercury at 4 degrees. He's got a Mercury-Saturn trine. So Starmer's Mercury is trine Zelensky's Sun-Venus conjunction. So when things are difficult for Starmer, he can invite Zelensky over, or perhaps travel to Kiev. So maybe they've got a good relationship there. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about Zelensky. I will be looking again at his horoscope. I think that December could be, I don't know, interesting is the wrong word, but we just have got Neptune about to go stationary, and that's something we need to be aware of. And I think it could well impact Zelensky through his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.